Hi everyone, I'm pleased to have architect and NextGen member Chris Radley with me today on episode 5 of Talking Shop with the NextGen, discussing all things NextGen and the future workplace. Welcome, Chris. I'll jump straight into questions if I may. Firstly, let's talk about some of the lessons learned from the pandemic, which you continue to take with you into your working life. What do architects need to be thinking about in London and beyond?
Well, I think there's probably two aspects to that question. One is lessons about the kind of buildings that I think we should be designing, and the other one is more lessons for, as designers, how we go about designing them and communicating those designs with people. So I think probably for us, the pandemic really reinforced some of the ideas that we think have been important in workplace design for a while, such as flexibility, volume, longevity of buildings and adaptation for different uses, access to greenery and fresh air. And I think one lesson that was really a change, I think, that we drew from the pandemic is that it became very clear that people like to be involved in the design of their working environment much more. And I think that's a result of a lot of people working from home for a long time, where they can obviously sort of customize their spaces and make things exactly the way they would want it to be. And I think that people are taking that attitude into their workplace. And it kind of highlights the fact that I think nowadays workplaces are sort of competing with other environments as places to do work. The office versus the home versus the cafe versus a co-working space, that kind of thing. And I guess the second part, the lesson we took in the way that we actually work from the pandemic is, I think it's clear that meetings will be mixed for a long time between people physically in the room and people watching on video. So that has implications for how we present things, discuss things. We have to think very carefully about using physical models in meetings, which was something that we were very keen on and still are keen on, but maybe they can be used with augmented reality so that people who are joining via the screen or the camera can also understand what we're presenting. So I think those are probably the key lessons.
Yes, very good. And a second question then, within commercial real estate, we often hear it said that future-proofing is at the heart of design and that resilience is important. So for the sake of lingo busting, what do we mean when we are saying resilient buildings?
So I think a resilient building is one that isn't necessarily unaffected by change, but can accommodate changes. And then once sort of the kind of extreme changes have passed, whatever they are, it can then sort of go back to a more normal operation somehow. So I think with respect to workplace buildings, it's having the capacity for kind of shorter term fluctuations in occupation behaviors or restrictions. And I think if a building can do that and remain as a viable workplace, then it's not only physically resilient, but also economically resilient. I think that's really important because I think part of the idea of having a resilient building and future-proofing it is trying to break the kind of 50-year demolition and redevelopment cycle that was commonplace, certainly up until a few years ago. And I think that is starting to change, I think, with new developments that are coming through and much more taking a longer term view of things, which I think is good.
Yeah, very much so. And then just on to next discussion is, what 3 projects have you looked to in recent years for some inspiration?
So, I mean, personally, I'm interested in how buildings can be adapted in novel or interesting ways, changing uses, or being designed to allow that to happen in the future. And that is pretty specific to the actual building or the client or the location. So I was trying to think about my answer to this question. It's quite hard to actually pick specific buildings. It's more of a kind of an approach, I think. I think we have been kind of tracking, personally, I've been tracking how some of the kind of slightly redundant retail environments have been repurposed recently, particularly department stores and kind of large retail spaces. That's something we're definitely interested in. In terms of new workplaces, there's a couple of projects that are sort of pre-planning, or they might have planning permission now, both in London Bridge, actually. One's by Foster and Partners and the other one's by Pilbara and Partners, and they're reasonably large workplace buildings, and they have all of the kind of sustainability credentials that people expect now. But I think that what I find interesting about them is the way that they approach the grounds and the public realm. They're both sort of lifted above the ground, and they have lots of green space, public space, and very permeable kind of entry, it appears. And I think that's really important for kind of workplaces that are looking towards the future, kind of demonstrating physically that they are sustainable buildings rather than a sort of the latest iteration of a very efficiently mechanically ventilated glass box, which can be quite hard for the public to appreciate what it's actually doing. I think if you have something that's visible and clear, I think that really helps the kind of case for these buildings.
Yes, I'm looking forward to see both those built, actually. Now, let's turn to the Brunel Building in London. It won the Commercial Workplace Awards at the 2020 National BCO Awards. The judges said the Fletcher Priest design scheme for developer Derwent, which was built alongside a canal in London and sits above a tube line, was an engineering masterclass in every way and praised its sleek industrial aesthetic. What do you think makes this project so special?
I think the building's response to its site is probably the key, both in terms of expressing the kind of history of engineering around that part of London, around the Paddington Basin and the Great Western Railway, but also really making the most of the canal side location, and kind of transforming that into a new public space. There are several kind of medium-sized workplace buildings elsewhere in the basin, but Brunel is the only one where the kind of main entrance is focused on the canal side of the site rather than the kind of roads on the other side. So we made the most of that through a kind of series of interconnected retail and reception spaces that can open up and sort of they're very, very flexible in how you can use them, and especially the pieces that face the canal. There's large sections of facade that can open up, so on a sunny day there's a kind of permeable boundary between the inside and outside, and it's really good to see that happening. It took a while for the building to kind of complete and fit outs to happen, and then the kind of COVID restrictions kicked in, so it's been a kind of long process, but it's definitely, I think, a real transformation on the site. But as well as that, I think there was some very clear ideas that the team had about exposing and expressing the structure and the services throughout the building, and the whole design team were on board with that. And also, I think, really, obviously, Derwent, were a big part of pushing that kind of those ideas forwards and helping the team and the contractors and the subcontractors. That everyone was kind of on the same page when it came to that, and I think that really helped. There was no, it was a true design team in the widest sense, I think, and I think the kind of strength of that is reflected in the success of the building, I think.
Yes, it is a wonderful building and certainly deserved the award. But can you name one thing, whether that's a piece of tech or maybe one of your colleagues or way of working, that currently makes your working life more productive and, say, more easier?
I think maybe going back to the first question, I think during the lockdown, I think the kind of job that we do as designers, it's very hard to do that individually through video calls and exchanging emails and stuff. So I think there's a kind of collection of bits of technology that were there before the pandemic, but I think we really learned how to use them in the best way through the lockdowns, and I think that is going to continue now we're kind of back in the office predominantly, and so that's like cloud storage and Teams and that kind of enabling collaboration digitally, I think was something that we learned how to do. And I think that is probably the biggest thing that's making, I think it has benefits now that we're back in the office, basically, is kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yes, very, very much so. And Chris, how do you constantly stay creative? If say reading is part of this for you, can you tell us what you're currently reading?
So I think I think the great thing about being an architect is that you're constantly looking towards the future and constantly changing. So you're presented with new briefs and contexts, new technologies. So I think that means you're always having to develop creative solutions. So I think staying creative, I think, I think it's something that's changed maybe the last few years, but really understanding that there are some environments or times of the day or the week that it's easier to do things, certain things, and sometimes or environments it's easier to do other things. So sort of planning out your times so that you might spend a day at home doing kind of more individual tasks, and then when you coming together as a team on certain days in the office, I think that's kind of helped us to be more productive, if you see what I mean. In terms of reading, I do read a bit, but more as a kind of break from architecture. I think I'm actually reading at the moment a biography of Alfred Hitchcock, because he grew up kind of where I live in London. It's a bit of a slog, to be honest, but it helps me get to sleep at night.
He was certainly very creative. And finally, can you offer any advice for the NextGen who are thinking of entering the 2022 BCO NextGen Ideas Project competition? Perhaps some advice from your creative process, or maybe some tips on how someone might approach the competition?
Yeah, I think if you're thinking about entering it, I would say do it. It was really good to do. When we entered, it was a kind of a group submission. I think this time it's individual submissions, but I think that means that you can really sort of explore something that you're personally interested in and see where it takes you, kind of using your professional knowledge and contacts and experience and everything, but I guess sort of speculating a little bit where things could go. And yeah, it was just really, really fun. I think yeah, I guess my advice would be find something that you're interested in personally, because it's much easier to sort of push that kind of in an extracurricular environment.
Excellent. Right, I'd like to remind those who are thinking of entering the NextGen Ideas Project competition this year. If you need some inspiration, Chris was on the winning team for their project Future Work, which won the 2020 NextGen Design Competition. If you haven't yet heard, the 2022 competition is now open. This year it is open to all disciplines and is more about ideas than design. So if you are thinking of entering, get those creative muscles flexed, as the deadline is the 20th of May. Now, that's it for time, I'm afraid. It was great speaking to you, Chris. Many, many thanks for your insight and inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you.